all had something to do with it. "The trouble with you, Rake," one of his friends said to him, "is that you have too much and too little competition." "I don't know what you mean by that," the Marquis replied. In actual fact, he was well aware that the latter part of the sentence was true. He had achieved everything far too easily. He had not been given a challenge, which, when he thought about it, was essential for a man of his age. Now, at nearly 30, he was beginning to think that he had tasted all the delights that were to be had in the social world he moved in. The same applied to the sporting world, where he reigned supreme. Last year, his horses had won the Grand National at Aintree and the Gold Cup at Ascot, and they had also been an easy first in a number of other classic races. "There really is not much point in us competing against you, Rakemoore," one of the members of the Jockey Club remarked. "In fact, as far as I'm concerned, race meetings are rapidly becoming just a one-man horse show." The member was particularly piqued because his horse had not been in the first 3. The Marquis did not bother to reply to him. Yet, when he had returned home, he wondered if there was not some truth in what had been said. Did his horses and his jockeys really need more competition? Now, unexpectedly, in the big race at Epsom, his chief jockey on trumpeter was having to exert himself considerably more than he had expected. The winning post was just ahead, and the Marquis could see his jockey's whole body straining with the effort of pushing trumpeter ahead of Ladybird. The roar of the crowd grew louder. Then, as the 2 horses passed the white post, the Duke gave an exclamation that was almost a cry. "A dead heat! Damn it!" "I think you are right," the Marquis said in a slow, controlled voice. For a moment the Duke was incapable of answering him. Then, because he too was a sportsman, he said, "Well, I certainly gave you a run for your money, Rakemoore." "It was one of the best races I have watched for a long time," the Marquis replied. "I've just thought," the Duke said. "As Ladybird's dam is outstanding, if she was served by your stallion, we might breed the champion of all time." The Marquis smiled. "It is certainly an idea." "It seems quite a sensible one," the Duke remarked, "considering our estates march with each other's, and I have another proposition to put to you." "What is that?" the Marquis asked. Both the owners were talking as they moved out of the stand, knowing that they had to watch their jockeys being weighed in. "My 3rd daughter is unmarried," the Duke replied, "and I think, if nothing else, you would have a bond in your knowledge of horseflesh." He laughed as if he had made a joke, but the Marquis stiffened. His lips set in a hard line. He moved quickly ahead so that there was no possibility of his replying to the Duke's suggestion. He walked towards the paddock, and he was thinking as he did so that this was typical of the Duke of Cumberworth. Only he would suggest that he should marry his daughter at a moment when they were both concerned with a very outstanding race. "Why the devil cannot people leave me alone?" the Marquis asked himself. At the same time, he automatically raised his hat to a very attractive woman. She reached out to put her gloved hand on his arm. "Congratulations, Rake," she said in a soft, seductive voice. "I just knew you would win." "I suppose half a loaf is better than no bread at all," the Marquis replied and passed on. There were a number of other women present to clutch at his arm, or else they gazed up at him, an invitation in their eyes and a provocative pout to their lips. By the time he reached his horse, the Marquis had raised his hat a dozen times. He had been congratulated by too many people for him to count them. Now, as he patted Trumpeter's neck, his jockey said, "I did me best, my lord, but I ain't never heard of that Ladybird afore." "You have heard of her now," the Marquis retorted, "and we shall doubtless hear a great deal more of her in the future." He was appraising the Duke's mare as he spoke, and he told himself that he had been very obtuse in not realising before the race that she was outstanding. The Duke was certainly delighted with his horse, his jockey, and himself. He accepted the congratulations of his friends, beaming on them almost as if he personally had been riding Ladybird. The Marquis knew better than anyone that it was a great achievement to have nearly beaten Trumpeter, and he could not help thinking that his stable had for once come up against some really stiff competition. "They have begun to take things too easy," he reprimanded himself. He knew in a way it was his own fault. The members of the Jockey Club were clustering round the Duke. It was obvious that they thought it was an achievement that had been needed for some time. Having watched his jockey weigh in, the Marquis walked slowly back to the paddock. He had a horse entered for the next race.